Assalamu alaikum. Class, this is a recorded video for chapter 7. Let's start discussing economic integration and cooperation. In this chapter, we'll be talking about three major approaches to economic integration, identify the major characteristics and challenges of the World Trade Organization. We'll talk about the pros and cons of the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization, and also different approaches to integration, free trade agreement, customs union, common market, and so on. Inshallah. So let's start. What is economic integration? When countries are trading internationally, it makes a lot of sense to have agreement between two countries where the governments or the political leaders decide that they would want to make the trade movements or maybe movement of factors of production or even goods and services like exports and imports easier between two countries or more countries. So economic integration is the political and monetary agreement among nations and world regions in which preference is given to member countries. There are three levels of integration: bilateral integration, where agreement between two countries, let's say country A and country B, or regional integration, where the agreement could be between two or more countries which is falling in a particular region, for example, let's say the Middle East region or the Americas or the Asia. And then there would be an international integration or a global integration of many countries across the whole world. Next, we'll talk about WTO, that is World Trade Organization. Now, World Trade Organization is an association of, or let's say it's an organization of agreement between more than 153 countries of the world. So, what they have done is they have a set of agreement where there could be reciprocal trade negotiation or enforcement of trade agreement between the countries. In 1947, after the World War, if you would think about it in that way, there was GATT, that is General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. This was an older agreement with 23 countries who joined together in an effort to bring about peace after the World War and also to improve trade relationship between the countries. So according to this agreement, the trade really prospered for some years, but then when more countries joined in, GATT got replaced with WTO. Under GATT, there was a particular mm, clause or an agreement section which was called most favored nation clause. It is MFN for short. It means within the agreement between the countries suggested that the countries would trade without any discrimination and in fact give a favored nation status to some or more countries within the agreement. In fact, in 1947, when GATT was formed, the agreements were something related to quotas or reduction of tariff. Remember what we meant by quotas and tariffs from our previous chapter discussions. In 1995, GATT was replaced by WTO. So today we continue with the WTO, and WTO still maintained the MFN clause, that is the most favored nation clause, which was approved at the time of GATT. And basically, it provides a mechanism for dispute settlement when so many countries, let's say 153 countries, have come together to solve their problems on international trade. So one example is during the Doha round, the agricultural subsidies agreement was passed, and then countries agreed to allow agricultural subsidies to their own domestic businesses. However, WTO is also criticized for failing to pay enough attention to labor and environmental concern. I mean, people concern and environment concern was not upheld with the WTO, and also undermining global diversity, because imagine 153 countries all trying to follow up single set of agreement. It did not go well with many of the countries. And also, the third criticism was it benefited the rich at the expense of the poor. So rich countries became richer and the poor countries were exploited. I think this thing we were also discussing in some of our other chapters before. So what happened was the WTO as a whole might have succeeded in certain areas, but might not have succeeded in other areas. So countries started taking up bilateral agreements. Now, bilateral agreement is an agreement between two individual countries, and it can be maybe one country dealing with another group of countries. This is also called as bilateral agreement. For example, Saudi Arabia may be wanting to have an agreement with the European Union, which is a group of countries which have joined together under an agreement. So here basically under the bilateral agreement, the two countries would agree on two main things. What that is, either to give preferential trade agreements, that is to give preferential right to each other, or it could even be a free trade agreement where the countries decide that there would be free trade between the two countries without any tariffs or any restriction among them. Next, we come to the second level of integration, which is called regional trade agreements, where a group of more than two countries can come together. Maybe they are because they lie within a particular region, they might come together to form an agreement to facilitate trade between them. For example, the European Union, which is an association of the European countries, and European Free Trade Area. Within Europe, there is another agreement which is called EFTA, that is European Free Trade Area, or NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area for the American countries. Then for the Asian countries, there is ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nation, and there is COMESA for the African region. Let's talk about each one of them in the following slide. So let's talk about free trade areas, custom union, and common market. So the major types of economic integration are three: free trade area, where the countries who have come into an agreement, they decide that there wouldn't be any internal tariffs between them. So it means if goods and maybe even capital is flowing from one country to another, the country is not going to levy any tariffs. The second level of economic integration in a regional context is customs union, where it would be at a little higher level than free trade area, because in free trade area the agreement is not to charge any tariff. However, in customs union the agreement would be not to charge any tariff also, and there wouldn't be there would be a common external tariff, meaning that let's say Saudi Arabia is having an agreement with the GCC, and let's say GCC is a regional agreement, so they would be having an agreement that we wouldn't be charging tariff between us, and also we charge the same tariff with any other party outside the GCC. So that would be called as the customs union. And then finally there is a common market. It would be a customs union, plus there would also be facilitation of factor mobility. Remember what is factor? Factor is labor and capital. So again, labor and capital would be facilitated and freely move from one country to another. Then we call that agreement as a common market. Next topic, we talk about effects of integration. Now, integration, that is agreement between the countries, whether it is regional, bilateral, or maybe even global, could lead to different types of effect. However, when we are talking about regional integration, it can lead to a static effect or a dynamic effect, but definitely it leads to some economies of scale. When we talk about static effect, it would lead to either trade creation or trade diversion. Now what does that mean? When we say trade creation, it means that you create more trade than what was existing before the agreement. However, trade diversion means that no extra trade or maybe opportunities have been created. Rather, the opportunities which were already available but were diverted from one country to another. So here, if you can look at this table, you will see here that here we talk about what would be the trade impact and the investment impact of maybe actions that is taken in the integration. So if there was a trade barrier drop for a member country, that means it is a static effect, where you would say that you no longer want to have any trade barrier between your country and the countries which fall in your agreement. Basically, you may lead to trade creation. That means your investment will shift from less efficient to more efficient firms, and maybe it can also lead to FDIs to that particular country in question. Suppose the trade barriers remain higher for non-member countries. That means you keep the same context. The non-member countries have to pay a higher level of tariff. In that case, again, it is a static effect. However, in this case, you will notice that no new trade would be created. Rather, the existing trade would be diverted from the countries who have to pay higher tariff to the countries where you have to pay a lower tariff. So maybe FDI increases maybe from the firms or from outside the free trade area to the ones who are coming within the agreement. Suppose the effect was increase in the market size. So we call this as a dynamic effect. Basically, it leads to trade creation because your market size is expanded. So that means your home country firm increases the FDI and achieve the economies of scale. So basically, it's very important to note what would be the impact of the integration within a particular region. Let's talk about the different forms of uh, regional integration. The first one we talk about is European Union. So let's say, what is the European Union? European Union is an association, or let's say an agreement between 27 European countries who have come together to form a regional integration. Here we'll talk about it as if they are, I mean, they form it's the only, we can say, it's one of the most important integration of the whole world, and it's the only example for a monetary union in the whole world. So let's talk about that. So basically this integration earlier was called as European Economic Community. Now later it was called as European Community, but now it's called as European Union. It is the largest and the most successful regional trade group in the world, and it provides free trade of goods, capital, and people within all these member countries. Not only that, it also uses common external tariff, and it has a common currency. So if you will notice these 3 points here, that which is, it is a free trade area, it is a common, we can say, union, and also it is having a common currency. So this makes European Union one of the unique regional trade agreements. So this is a I mean, this is a map of the European countries. If you will notice, there are 27 member countries of the European Union, where EU have, I mean, some of them have applied. That was long back in 2015. They have applied to become the European Union members, and then there are some other members of the CEFTA, EFTA, and EEA. We'll talk about them in the next slide, who also have joined the European Union. Recently, you must have heard about Brexit. Brexit was an effort of UK to come out of the European Union. Brexit. Okay, just let me write that. Sorry, I don't have a proper pen here. Okay, so Brexit was the effort of the UK to come out of the European Union. As you know, now it has fully come out of the European Union, so it means the European Union now consists of all other member countries other than the UK. Moving on, European Union, they have a particular organization structure. First, at the top is the European Commission. It provides the political leadership, it makes the laws, it runs the various daily program or the operations of the European Union. At the second level comes the Council of the European Union. They're composed of head of the states, each member of each member country, and then comes the European Parliament, who have legislative power. They control the budget, and also they supervise the executive decisions. And finally, there is European Court of Justice, which applies the treaties or the agreements and also interprets the agreement. Sometimes if there is a misunderstanding or a argument, European Court of Justice tries to settle them. Under the European Union, all this agreement did not happen at one shot. In fact, there were many individual agreements which were formed in order to consolidate the European Union. The first of such example is Single European Act, which was designed to eliminate the remaining non-tariff barrier to trade in the Europe. So after the European Union was formed, still some countries had some barriers within the European Union. So Single European Act was passed to ensure that all the member countries removed the non-tariff barriers between the European Union. Then there was a Lisbon Treaty, which strengthens the European Union's governance process and improves the ability of the European Union to make and implement decisions. In fact, it gave governance right to the European Union, where it could take decisions and make laws which would apply to all the member countries. Finally, there was this Treaty of Maastricht, which fostered political and monetary union. That means the euro as a currency was formed under this treaty. So, what about companies who are doing business with the European Union? So, we say that the companies who do business with the European Union will treat European Union as a country as a whole. In fact, they have to determine where to produce the product and also determine what their entry strategy will be. Basically, they need to balance the commonness of the European Union with their national differences. So you will see that it is not a single country, it is a combination of more than 27 countries within the European Union. So you have to follow all the required strategies to adhere to such a wide audience. Next, we come to NAFTA. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Here it includes Canada, US, and Mexico. In fact, it says there would be free trade in goods, services, and investment between countries, whether the sizes were different and their wealth were different. So, some trade and investment was diverted to Mexico as a result of this. Mexico was very underdeveloped before the NAFTA, but after NAFTA, it seems that Mexico has taken some benefit out of this. It follows the FTA, that is the free trade area. That means between these countries there would not be any tariff. Of course, there is a rule which they follow. The rule is called the rule of origin. That is, the goods must have been originated from these three countries, Canada, US, and the Mexico, to take the benefit of the free trade area. As a regional context, we say at least 50% of the net cost of the production must come from the NAFTA region. In addition to that, some other provisional, like there are workers' rights, the environment, and dispute resolution mechanism, which has been agreed upon between these countries. So NAFTA is not the only agreement in the American region. There are other six major regional economic groups in the USA. So first one is the Caribbean Community, which is called CARICOM, and then there is Central American Common Market. Then there is CAFTA-DR, that is Central American Free Trade Agreement, Andean Community, which is called CAN, and Mercosur, that is Southern Common Market, and there is Latin American Integration Association, that is LITA. So what you need to get from this slide is that even in the Americas there is not just one regional agreement, but there are multiple regional agreements between countries for various purposes and maybe various products and services. This is to show you the various countries which have formed the agreement in the USA. For the Latin American integration, it is mostly the South American countries which have come together. In the Asian region, as I showed you in the previous slide, the first integration is ASEAN, that is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the second is the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, that is the APEC, where there is an open regionalism, meaning that countries of that region could trade between each other with the same tariff agreements. So Southeast Asia actually falls just below China and goes up to maybe above the Australia. Those countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and all, they form the Asian regional integration. Other We talk about Africa in this slide. In Africa, there are several efforts at economic integration even in the African area. So first one is PAFTA, which is Pan-Arab Free Trade Area. Then there is an Arab League. Then there is a GCC. We are all familiar with that. And then there is a African Union. So basically, if you look at the African region, these are the areas which fall under that geographical location, and they have formed their own trade agreements. But we'll also talk about some global integration. At regional level, we have seen the agreements in the Asia, the Africa, the America, the Europe. Similarly, we will also notice that in some context, there has been an agreement worldwide which comes under the United Nations, which was established in 1945. Basically, this agreement was undertaken in order to promote peace and security. So under that, there is an act called as UNCTAD, UNCTAD, which helps the developing countries to participate in international trade. So also UN, that is the United Nations, allows the formation of non-governmental organization, NGOs for short, which are private non-profit institutions that are independent of the government, and they try to uphold the rights of people in various parts of the world. UN is a very strong cooperation among the worldwide countries, which definitely has a say in the various rules and regulations that has been formed between various countries. So we look at you maybe other type of agreements which in the world economy sometimes countries form agreement not just because they are in a geographical location, but maybe because they are dealing in a particular product or commodity. So commodities can form a basis for economic integration. So for example, raw materials or primary product that enter into trade, there are many commodity agreements that exist so that they can discuss issues or disseminate information or even improve the product safety. The best example for commodity integration is the OPEC, that is oil producing economies and countries. OPEC, it is a producers cartel that relies on the quotas to influence prices. Of course, we know that Saudi Arabia is a member of the OPEC. It establishes production quotas for member countries. That is, it restricts the uh, maybe the quantity that a particular country could extract from the nature, and it produces about 33.6% of the world's crude and 19% of the natural gases. That is, countries which fall under the OPEC actually produce a huge quantity of world crude oil and also natural gases. The countries understand that there is a downside for high prices. Whenever there is a high price, then it is an incentive to the non-OPEC countries to start producing oil and gas, and also there it would be not possible to balance the social, political, and economic objectives of the country when there is a very high price for the materials. Moving on, when we talk about what would happen to these type of regional agreement in the future, on one side we know that there are some global agreements. However, global agreements like WTO that we discussed at the beginning of the chapter does not cover the regional, we can say, regional problems or maybe the regional concerns of various countries. So regional integration is definitely going to improve as the future goes. And in fact, this regional agreement could also encourage the WTO to achieve its objectives. For example, regionalism can lead to liberalization of issues which is not covered by the WTO. In fact, regionalism is more flexible. It means the countries can make or change their agreement called clauses in order to get the best out of it. And the regional deals lock in liberalization. So whenever there is a deal, whenever there is an agreement at the regional level, in fact, it liberalizes the whole region. With this, we'll try to finish off our discussion on this chapter, and I hope I'll open up a discussion forum where we can discuss any concerns that you may have regarding this chapter.